This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Algeria's parliament confirms Speaker Abdel Kader Bendalah as interim president. The UN warns that attacks on civilians in Libya may amount to war crimes. And the African Union is concerned about growing insecurity in Sudan. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Raman Young with a preview of your business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. A World Bank report is forecasting much slower economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa. And a new carbon tax bill in South Africa could cost Anglo-American Platinum up to $21 million in years to come. We'll be looking at the numbers in those stories and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's start the hour in Algeria, where the country's parliament has confirmed Abdel Kader Bendalah as the interim president. The country will hold new elections within 90 days. The decision to name Bendalah interim president follows the Constitutional Council's decision last week to declare the presidency vacant on account of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's failing health. Protesters, though, took to the streets to oppose the decision. They see Bendalah as too close an associate to former President Bouteflika and are calling for a complete overhaul of the system. Bendalah has called on Algerians, on his part, to work together.
I will shoulder my responsibility and work to strictly enforce the Constitution. I pledge that I will work to achieve the ambitious goals. I call on you at this time to work with all the seriousness and sincerity in order to bring power back to the people.
I believe that trust is not between us and the Algerian politicians. I don't think that Bendalah's inauguration is a positive step.
I do not wait for much of this step. We have to go directly to the presidential elections and not just rely on the patchwork solutions.
Well, let's take a look back at how events in Algeria transpired. Dubbed the Smile Revolution, anti-Bouteflika protests in Algeria have been going on for weeks now. They began on February 16th, just 10 days after then-President Abdelaziz Bouteflika announced his plans to seek a fifth term in office after being in power for 20 years. Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the days leading up to March 3rd, the deadline for submitting a candidacy for the presidential election. Well, despite uproar, Bouteflika's campaign manager submitted his candidacy in flaming protests, and on March 10th, Bouteflika then announced he would not seek a fifth term. Unappeased by the statement, hundreds of thousands took to the streets calling for Bouteflika to resign immediately. And on March 26th, Algeria's army chief called for Bouteflika to step down or be declared medically unfit. On April 2nd, he submitted his official resignation to the Constitutional Court, and 7 days later, Parliament voted for Abdel Kader Bendalah to act as interim president. New elections will have to be held within a 90-day period, but of course protesters continue to pour into the streets calling for more radical change. Well, let's get to you more on the situation in Algeria. We're now joined by CGTN's Adel Al-Mahraoui in Cairo. Adel, of course, as we know, protests continue in Algeria. Just talk us through what's been happening since the announcement confirming Abdel Kader Bendalah as interim president.
Protests continue in Algeria. There actually have been one of the most violent days since the uprising of the Algerian people began. It was the first time that the Algerian police start using tear gas to disperse protesters, which has not happened in several weeks. So it is an indication of how furious these protesters are and how determined they want to continue their rallies despite the confirmation of the vacancy of the presidential seat and appointing an interim president. They want to see a complete restructuring to the country, and it seems that they're not willing to quit their protests until this happens. So the rallies are continuing, and the calls for the rallies to continue are getting a huge popularity within the country. Of course, the entire process that will go next is definitely what will have an impact on the level of frustrations or the level of intensity of these protests.
And of course, as you say, the major call is for a complete overhaul of the political system. But do protesters have a particular issue with the interim president Bendalah? Is there a sense that his relationship to the former president may have been too close?
Well, it has been quite close. Abdel Kader Bendalah is the Speaker of the Parliament, where President Abdelaziz Bouteflika was president for years, and therefore they do not see in Bendalah a different political vision or a sign for change, and this is one of the things that has not made them so satisfied. Also, the entire set of the political system itself, in terms of the powerful political parties within Algeria, they are still the same influencers within the politics area in Algeria, and this is not what has been the aspirations of those who have taken the streets. There are, of course, opposing voices that are also escalating, those supporters for President Bouteflika and those supporters of the two major political parties there, who believe that the transition should be within a stable framework through their political system. But of course, this is not what the masses that took the streets want.
And so what then is the way out of this current crisis? I mean, despite calls for a complete overhaul of the establishment, authorities are insisting that they are following the letter of the law, they are following the constitution.
Well, they are, of course, and this is what has been called for by Abdel Kader Bendalah, but before him, Ahmed Qaid Saleh, the military chief, who actually was the trigger to push these political movements to take a different track than supporting Bouteflika. Until the last even a few days, this was still a big question of what will be the fate of Bouteflika, and then he decided to step down. So what protesters actually need is to see a radical plan of change. And let's also quite stress that once Abdel Kader Bendalah has rose as interim president, the country is now, according to the constitution, is stuck within a 90 days deadline to hold presidential elections. But what will precede these elections, this might be the trigger that will have and might satisfy the protesters that are still in the streets with the numerous numbers, hundreds of thousands, through the past weeks we've seen. There might be calls for the change of the constitution or a new vote for the parliament, and then would give that parliament the authority, a new fresh parliament from these uprising, or that has been built out of these uprising. And that parliament would then lead the country to the rest of whether they want constitutional referendum or a new constitution, and ending by a presidential election. So which has come first, and what exactly will be the framework to imply these elections is definitely what will have an impact on calming down these protesters.
Indeed, the next 90 days will be very telling indeed. Thank you so much, Adel Al-Makhri, joining us there from Cairo. Now let's go to the latest news coming out of Libya. As the battle for Tripoli rages, the UN is warning warring factions against targeting civilians. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, has also said fighters targeting unarmed citizens risk being charged for war crimes. Meanwhile, the United Nations mission in Libya says it is maintaining its operations in the North African nation, although staff numbers have been reduced. The death toll from fighting has risen to 51, even as calls for a humanitarian truce continue. CGTN's Noel Makugu reports.
Authorities in Libya have closed the only functioning airport in the capital, Tripoli, after it was hit by an airstrike. General Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army has acknowledged striking the Mitiga airport, barely 8 kilometers east of the city center. A spokesman for LNA said the strike only targeted military aircrafts and did not aim to disrupt civilian services at the airport.
We were instructed to target this aircraft and to target another aircraft, a Chinook helicopter that was next to the jet. The two aircraft were destroyed, so we did not target civil aviation.
Flights were suspended for several hours, but the airport reopened and resumed operations. Meanwhile, the head of the Libyan parliament, Aguila Saleh, has condemned the battle in Tripoli. Saleh, who heads the parliament based in east of Tobruk, was speaking to reporters in Cairo after meeting the Arab League chief Ahmed Abdel Kader.
In implementation of the constitutional declaration and the parliamentary decision to vacate the capital from the armed groups, and in accordance with the political agreement that states that these militia are taking over the capital, the Libyan National Army has moved to the capital for one target, that is to expel this armed group who have taken over the capital.
Battles for the capital have been raging for days, focused mainly on the outskirts of Tripoli. Last week, the Libyan National Army Force launched an advance towards the capital in the west, the home for the internationally recognized government. The United Nations says thousands have been displaced while fleeing from the escalation of violence in and around Tripoli.
Our humanitarian colleagues on the ground report that the escalation of violence in and around Tripoli has caused the displacement of some 3,400 people fleeing from fighting and has blocked emergency services from reaching casualties and civilians. Fighting has also damaged electricity lines. Clashes with heavy weapons are affecting residential areas, and an unknown number of civilians are unable to flee these locations. We're calling for a temporary humanitarian truce to allow for the provision of emergency services and the voluntary passage of civilians, including those wounded from the areas of conflict.
LNA forces have clashed with rival militias which support the UN-backed government that controls Tripoli and the western part of the country. The escalation has threatened to plunge the North African nation deeper into chaos after years of instability following the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Nolmakuru, CGTN.
Well, the African Union says it is worried about developments in Libya. The AU says both sides should agree to dialogue as the only way of solving the current crisis.
Libyan crisis needs to be preceded by a Libyan-led, Libyan-owned, inclusive dialogue of all the actors towards a new political dispensation that can then resolve the issues that have been plaguing the country. The African Union Commission is still on course to convene a national reconciliation forum here in Addis Ababa in July, which is then supposed to follow the national dialogue that is being convened under the auspices of the United Nations later this week. Despite the new developments and the military assault in Libya at the moment, it is probably even more important that those processes not only take place, but that the actors actively participate.
Well, for more on the situation in Libya, we're now joined by Dr. Nabil Negem Eldin, an independent researcher and author of International Politics, joining us from our Cairo studios. Dr. Nabil, casualties are rising in this battle for Libya's capital, and calls for, or even international condemnation is not really being heard. In your view, do you see Haftar backing down?
I don't believe that Commando Haftar is going to back down unless he gets, the heavy stick policy against him. General Haftar is aiming to unseat Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, and he believes that he is the one who is qualified to rule. I don't believe that the United Nations is managing the situation properly. Today they have declared to postpone the upcoming national conference, which was supposed to be held in Ghadames 14th and 15th of the current month. The situation in Libya could be simply described as it is a failed state.
And on that note then, do you feel as though Islamic State and other groups of this nature might take advantage of this situation of a failed state, particularly as this conflict seems to worsen?
Of course, what's going on in Libya for the last 3 years or 4 years is turning that rich oil country into a heaven to terrorist organizations and extremists. I don't think that what's going on in Libya is good for anybody. It's not good for Sub-Sahara area, is not good for the neighboring Arabic countries, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, is not good for Europe. What's going on in Libya is a quite mess. And I believe very much NATO is responsible and the international community is fully responsible of that mess.
But what happens next, though? At least what should happen? I mean, the European Union has expressed reluctance to engage militarily in this situation. The AU similarly does not want to intervene militarily. You've already said, however, that the UN is not doing the right thing or responding correctly. But what options are they left for both the regional and international community?
I do believe that banging heads is the only logical option available in that chaos scene. NATO, as they have intervened with a heavy stick policy 2011, they have to do it again to restore stability first of all, and to disarm everybody and restructure the state of Libya. What's going on in Libya is quite dangerous, and it might extend the negative repercussion into the whole region.
Indeed, those repercussions will be felt far and wide. Dr. Nabil, thank you so much joining us there from Cairo. Now let's move on to other news. A group of prominent opposition leaders in Sudan have joined protesters for the first time in 3 months for a sit-in outside the Army Command headquarters in the capital, Khartoum. The demonstrators are demanding the current government step down. The latest unrest has left at least 6 people dead, according to the country's interior minister. Frequent protests have been staged in Sudan since December, when the government tried to raise the prices of basic commodities. Meanwhile, the UN is calling on all parties to exercise the utmost restraint and avoid violence. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. The UN says much-needed aid is now reaching those displaced in the aftermath of Cyclone Idai. And dubbed Women's Safe Space, a recovery center in South Sudan is allowing women and girls to speak about gender-based violence.
Nigeria now for a look at some economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
From Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice. We start in Mozambique now. The United Nations says much needed aid is reaching those displaced in the aftermath of Cyclone Idai. Close to 800,000 people have received food assistance, with over 200,000 homes damaged or destroyed. CGTN's Robert Nagila visited a camp housing internally displaced people in Beira and filed this report.
At a makeshift camp in Beira for displaced persons in the aftermath of Cyclone Idai, a group of women queue, waiting to receive donated clothing for their families.
I did not take any belongings when the cyclone hit Buzi. We lost everything, including our house.
The camp is one of several set up in Beira after Cyclone Idai made landfall on March 15th, claiming at least 600 lives. Situated at a technical college, it hosts close to 2,000 people, mostly from the town of Buzi, 200 kilometers away. They're among the lucky ones. Here at least, they're provided with food, shelter and much-needed medical help.
We have treated a lot of respiratory infections and diarrhea. In total, 1,343 patients have been treated.
According to the latest figures from the United Nations, close to 800,000 people received food assistance, while a further 10,000 are getting daily ready-to-eat meals. About 240,000 homes have been destroyed or damaged. Previously only accessible by air, the road to Buzi has now been repaired and more people are receiving much-needed help.
It's still quite critical there, but a number of aid agencies now have a forward operating base in Buzi, which allows them to address the needs in Buzi, but also the communities around Buzi.
Back at the camp, Jao Ndinda, a father of 6, has a reason to smile. Separated from his wife and 6 children when Buzi was engulfed by floods, he was among the hundreds airlifted by helicopters to safety in Beira.
I have been told they survived. They are all alive.
And despite the uncertainty the future holds, most people here are just thankful to be alive. It is still not known how long these people will be housed in these camps. Most, if not all, have lost everything and have nothing to go back to. Rebuilding their lives will be a struggle and may take years. Robert Nagela, CGTN, Beira, Mozambique.
Next week, the Egyptian parliament is scheduled to announce constitutional amendments which will redraw the balance of power between the judiciary and other state entities. They include restricting the influence of the state council and creating a higher judicial entity led by the president. Some accuse the suggested amendments of intruding on judicial independence. CGTN's Adel Al-Mahrawi has more.
Each judicial institution in Egypt has been used to recommend its oldest board member for the President of Egypt to get appointed as its chair. Parliament is currently discussing constitutional amendments that will give the President wider options during that appointment procedure. All judicial entities would be obliged to each recommend 5 board members for the President to select from.
Some
of the world's oldest democracies in the world, the president appoints directly the top judge in different courts. What we are providing is a more developed mechanism from the direct appointment other countries use. It also gives room for the more capable judges to lead instead of fixating it to the oldest.
The amendments under discussion will also limit the state council authority over the government. Instead of looking into all governmental agreements, it will be limited to contracts passed to it by the executive authority. Parliament is also recommending the formation of a Supreme Council for Judicial Joint Affairs, led by the Egyptian president.
The prime purpose of this new entity is to supervise the administrative part of the judicial authority. It's similar to the role of the justice minister sometimes. This new council will be the meeting point between the judicial and the executive authorities, as it is an inclusion for both authorities. And according to the current constitution, the president is the leader of all state institutions, including judicial bodies.
Critics have accused these amendments to be a violation of judicial independence in Egypt. These constitutional amendments are not final yet.
Opposition powers are hoping that Parliament would take out many of what they call restrictive measures to the judiciary next week when they announce the final draft for the constitution. Egyptians will be called to vote in a referendum before the end of April. Adel Al-Mahrawi, CGTN, Cairo.
In the far northwest of South Sudan, a centre has become a secondary home for women and girls. Dubbed the Women's Safe Space, the centre allows women and girls to meet and share information and experiences about gender-based violence. It's part of efforts to curb the vice and help prevent violence against women and girls.
Since conflict erupted in South Sudan in 2011, many women are said to have either experienced or witnessed rape. Many are silent rape victims. But in such centers known as safe spaces, women and girls talk, share experiences, and discuss preventive measures. They also receive different skills with which to improve their livelihoods.
This center has helped women in many ways. Some are able to make bed sheets. Those women dancing right now are able to make beads and many other things.
All the difficulties we're facing as women have reduced, and we come here as women to solve some of our stress. By the time we go home, it has gone. That's why we always come here to spend our day. This center has helped us women a lot.
The Women and Girls Safe Spaces were established by the UN in consultation with the community.
And with many people from the United Nations here with me, the future for women is very, very important for us in South Sudan.
And we are hereby requesting your respective office in Juba to help women under a quick project to build more women centers where women can gather and do activities as women to allow women participating in development and peace building.
Since the establishment of the safe centers, women are taking gender-based violence more seriously. They have also become aware about their rights. Chomgono, CGTN.
2 weeks after an attack that killed 157 people in the central Malian town of Ouagadougou, survivors remain stranded in the destruction. They are now trying to rebuild their lives, but many of them have been scarred physically and suffer psychological trauma.
Survivors walk past the remains of what used to be their homes. Dozens of villages were wiped out during the raid last month in Ouagadougou in Mali. It has been described as one of the worst attacks in Africa's Sahel region in history. Villagers speak of horror and pain.
They destroyed these vehicles. They destroyed people's homes. The damage is immense. They ransacked our mothers' homes. They made sure they left nothing behind. For the rest, we look to God.
We didn't have time to flee. Those who tried were shot. They threw a lot of people down the well. That's why we came to the pump for water. They tried to destroy the pump too, but they didn't succeed. They burnt a lot of the huts where we kept livestock and food. They shot people. A bullet grazed my shoulder.
On this day, Red Cross workers have come to the village to distribute food and to conduct discussion groups aimed at easing the survivors' emotional suffering.
When we talk about traumatic events of this kind, the pain is not just physical, the damage is also psychological.
The raid was part of a wider surge in ethnic and jihadist violence across Mali and neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. Hunters from the Dogon community in Ouagadougou, populated by rival Fulani herders, are thought to be responsible. Malian authorities have since detained 5 people suspected of taking part in the massacre. The United Nations and the International Criminal Court had also said the crimes could fall under its jurisdiction. Chomgono, CGTN.
Recapping your top stories this hour, Algeria's parliament has confirmed Abdel Kader Bendalah as the interim president. The country will hold new elections within 90 days. The decision to name Bendalah as interim president follows the Constitutional Council's decision last week to declare the presidency vacant on account of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's failing health. Protesters, however, have taken to the streets opposing the appointment. The UN is warning warring factions in Libya against targeting civilians. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, has also said fighters targeting unarmed citizens risk being charged for war crimes. The death toll from the fighting has risen to 51, this even as the UN calls for a humanitarian truce. A group of prominent opposition leaders in Sudan have joined protesters for the first time in 3 months for a sit-in outside the Army Command headquarters in the capital, Khartoum. The demonstrators are demanding the current government step down. The latest unrest has left at least 6 people dead, according to the country's Interior Ministry. The African Union has expressed concern over growing insecurity in the country and has called for restraint. And the United Nations says much-needed aid is finally reaching those displaced in the aftermath of Cyclone Idai in Mozambique. Close to 800,000 people have received food aid, with over 200,000 homes damaged or destroyed. Meanwhile, nearly 60% of the population in affected areas has been vaccinated for cholera, while hundreds of suspected cases are receiving treatment. And those are your top stories this hour. And time now for your business news with Raman Young.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. A World Bank report is forecasting a lot slower economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa. And South Africa's new carbon tax bill could cost Anglo-American Platinum up to $21 million in years to come. Details coming up shortly.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
China has 35,000 plant species, 1/10 of the world's total. A cradle of civilizations. Elements of life turn into a journey of beauty. It spreads for thousands of miles without an end. Favors of nature. Creations of mankind. Carols for plants. Praises for life. The journey of Chinese plants, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's start with some macro data. The World Bank has cut its growth forecast for sub-Saharan Africa this year to just 2.8% from an initial forecast of 3.3%. Now, according to the bank, the region's lower than expected overall growth increasingly comes from domestic macroeconomic instability that includes poorly managed debt in some countries, inflation in others, and sky-high deficits in others as well. Now, the bank does warn that the rates of debt in sub-Saharan Africa are growing pretty fast, and the type of borrowing, the type of debt that countries are taking on is exposing them to a whole host of vulnerabilities. Research does show that by the end of 2018, nearly half of the countries in the region were at high risk of debt distress, or were in fact in debt distress. Nigeria, South Africa and Angola collectively make up about 60% of sub-Saharan Africa's annual economic output. They're all facing a range of challenges, and that all curbed their contribution to overall growth. South Africa's new carbon tax could cost Anglo-American Platinum anywhere between $14.2 million and $21.4 million in the next 3 years. That comes after Parliament approved a long-delayed carbon tax bill as it seeks to reduce harmful carbon emissions in the country. Now, the new law allows a tax rate of $8 and about 50 cents per tonne of CO2 emitted. In 2016, South Africa ratified the Paris Climate Agreement and it pledged to cut emissions by almost half by 2030. It aims to cut down the emissions to an equivalent of between 398 and 614 million tonnes of CO2. Residents of one of South Africa's oldest townships took their fight to Africa's richest square mile on Monday. Sandton is the wealthiest suburb on the continent and it's situated less than 3 kilometers away from Alexandra. But the township has been deeply neglected and it has steadily deteriorated in the last quarter of a century. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the latest.
Alexandra residents have taken to the streets for the second time in less than a week. They're pleading with Johannesburg Mayor Herman Mashaba for better services, decent housing and a safer township.
All we are asking is for dignity in Alexandra. We've been sitting in scum conditions forever. When Herman Mashaba came into power, he promised us change. He promised to better our conditions. It has been 2 years and nothing has changed. Young kids in Alexandra are exposed to sexual activities because we live in one-room conditions. We're exposed to all sexual ills. It's like a perpetuation of the apartheid system.
The immediate issues are your garbage and in the streets, on the pavements and street corners of Alex. Those are immediate. Also your potholes as well. The illegal electricity connections and also illegal connections to water pipelines as well. Also with parks as well. People are invading parks, building illegal structures on empty spaces, building illegal structures on pavements as well.
Protesters staged mass protests last week shutting down the township, but the mayor was not on hand to receive their list of demands.
So you can see the communities out in numbers to make sure that the cries are not falling on deaf ears again. They are being heard and everything is addressed today. We don't want to meet Mashaba in boardrooms. As a responsible mayor, he should have been here.
Alexandra residents have finally arrived in Sandton. The roads that lead into South Africa's economic hub came to a standstill and now they're demanding to speak to the mayor and they want to deliver their memorandum.
I am angry because we've marched all the way from Alexandra and Herman Mashaba is not here. We've been waiting for him for so long and he hasn't responded to us.
The mayor is expected to meet with the community next week, but he may have to deal with more disruptions if he does not respond sooner. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Still in the country, the resorts hotel chain and casino group Sun International expects its flagship resort, Sun City, to bounce back in the later part of the year. Now, the group has been underperforming in recent years and that's prompted the firm to write down its value asset for the first time in about 40 years. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with more.
The famous Sun City Hotels and Casino Resort was the brainchild of Saul Kerzner. He opened the resort in 1979 in what was then a homeland under apartheid. For Kerzner, it was perfect. He opened the first casino in Bopo, Botswana, homeland, where gambling was legal. It was illegal in South Africa. Over the years, Sun City has grown into a massive asset for the Sun International Group. But the weak economy is taking away some of its shine.
I think the main reason, is a bit of a downturn in business, difficult environment. We spent a lot of money on Sun City a few years ago, and Sun City is in pretty good state.
Severe storms flooded the resort late last year. However, the extra spend and a 3% decline in income forced auditors to lower the value of Sun City for the first time.
We spent over $1 billion. The value of Sun City is quite high, so the auditors look at it and say, is this an indication of impairment? And we impaired the asset carrying value. The asset itself is still in very good state and for customers is really a great product.
The mess up with visa regulations, the recent hike in VAT and cash-strained consumers not only affected Sun City but gaming revenue in other parts of South Africa. However, Sun International still reported a 7% rise in revenue in 2018.
Sun International Group expects to return to a full profit in 2019. It may still be a bit of a stretch as the consumer market in South Africa in particular remains constrained.
It was really through being efficient, really working hard at what we do and making sure there's no wasted cost, wasted effort. So that's been the big focus of the past year, and I think given the circumstances, the environment we currently face, That's going to be the continuing theme for the next year or so. These things take time. We're optimistic in the medium term that things will get better. But in the short term, we understand consumers under pressure, businesses under pressure, and people holding back.
Consumers don't have discretionary income to be spending to go on holiday. So this was also one of the reasons why there's been a decline in the demand for accommodation over the course of 2018 and into 2019. So consumers are definitely cutting back and their ability to travel within the country is limited. But within this environment, consumers got high levels of indebtedness.
Analysts expect South Africa's retail and leisure sector to improve in the second half of the year after the elections. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Over in Zimbabwe, more than 300 former commercial white farmers have lodged applications for compensation for the displacement and harm done during the land reforms program, which started in the year 2000. Now, the government over there says the payments are key to mending ties to the West. To that end, it set aside over $17 million to pay hundreds of former white settlers. Here's CGTN's Farai Mukutuya with the latest.
Nearly 20 years after the land redistribution began, Zimbabwe is finally making good on its obligation to compensate former white farmers for improvements made on the farms they lost. The expectant beneficiaries, some of whom have fallen on hard times, have welcomed the development which could bring closure to a contentious chapter in Zimbabwe's history.
It's a result of dialogue which in the past wasn't there, and I think what's significant about it is it will aim at improving the circumstances of many people who were dispossessed many years ago on a sort of a self-select basis, so those in greatest need will be able to access the support that is there now, and government is committed to a process that helps us deal with the big issue and move forward.
Compensation was one of President Emmerson Mnangagwa's inauguration promises when he took over in November 2017. His government has set aside $17.5 million as it works on raising the balance, which is expected to run into billions. The Commercial Farmers Union is compiling the database of farmers due to receive payments.
The total number of claimants from records that we have is about 3,500, something like that. In this initial situation, what we're expecting is that this money that is there will be shared between those applicants who apply on a pro rata basis.
More than 300 applications have been received in the 3 days since registration began. Farai Mukutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, news further afield. The scandal involving Nissan's former CEO and chairman Carlos Ghosn has now taken a new turn after prosecutors took the rather unusual step of re-arresting him last week. The arrest followed fresh allegations that he used company funds to enrich himself, this time to the tune of $5 million. The once feted executive had been out on a $9 million bail for 30 days. In a recently released video recorded on the 3rd of April, Ghosn addressed the public for the first time since his initial arrest last year, insisting, as far as he's concerned, he's innocent.
I'm innocent. It's not new. You have heard it from me in January. I repeat it today. I'm innocent of all the charges that have been brought against me. And I'm also innocent of all the accusations that came around these charges that are all biased, taken out of context, twisted in a way to paint a personage of greed and a personage of dictatorship.
We'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though, in global business. We'll be looking at the challenges that are slowing down economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa. The latest forecasts from the World Bank and the IMF are making for pretty sober reading. We'll dive into the numbers and the details at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Lindy.
Thank you so much, Rama. We'll take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. A deaf artist from Zambia wows crowds in Dubai with lightning speed painting.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria's town of Igbo-Ora in the south of the country is fast becoming a city of twins. The town has one of the highest rates of identical twin births in the world, and many are attributing this to diet.
Walking on the streets of Igbo-Ora town, you might think you are seeing double. Sights of duplicate facial features is pretty common in the town. So common are identical twins here that locals have been pondering on the possible causes of multiple births.
There's so many twins in Igbo-Ora because of the okra leaves we eat. If the resident and visitors eat the okra leaf, they will give birth to twins. And we the twins love eating scented palm oil, beans and bananas.
Many have pointed out amala, a local dish made from yams and cassava flour, as the cause of multiple births. Medical practitioners, however, believe the causes of the phenomena lie elsewhere.
In other parts of the world, where the same species of yam has been cultured, have been grown, and people have taken it, they didn't get similar high level of training. So thus far, scientifically, nobody can say this is the reason. But one of the plausible reasons is that the hereditary aspect of it. Because maybe over the years, because they intermarry, you now have that gene being pulled and concentrated in that environment.
Local tradition on how the leaves are consumed is believed to be very crucial in achieving the desired results.
When we cook this okra leaf, we eat it immediately. The following day we cook it again. For as long as I have known people to eat this okra leaf, we've been giving birth to twins. Because I eat okra leaves a lot, I gave birth to 8 sets of twins, but only 4 sets are alive.
The rate of twin births in West Africa is about 4 times higher than in the rest of the world. Research suggests that there are around 50 sets of twins in every 1,000 births in Igbo-Ora. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Zambian painter Victor Sitali has been moving crowds at the World Art Dubai exhibition with his unimaginable speed on the canvas. What makes it all the more interesting is that Victor cannot hear. Jane Q has more.
Due to his hearing impairment, Victor Sitali lives in silence, but his hands on the canvas are fast and furious. In just 7 minutes, this Zambian artist is done with his painting. Victor is obviously living the moment of his life, but his journey to the top has not been easy.
He wasn't born deaf, but it's something that came gradual. Something we suspect after a very high fever when he was 2.5. But we discovered by the time he was about 2.5, 3, that's when he was pronounced hard of hearing. As time went on, then he became totally deaf.
As a young boy, his family moved to Dubai, where he was enrolled in an art school for children with special needs.
When we came to Dubai, because of the hardships of the schools for the deaf people, there's a lady called Gushen who discovered him from Dubai Center for Special Needs and encouraged him to join Mawaheb.
It was a case of trial and error as his mother explored ways of making Victor a better person.
At the time you discover you are hopeless and all the days all you think of is crying. How will I handle my child? What will be of my child? What kind of future will my child have? But with this, what he's doing now, luckily we came here also where he met with this encouragement to his talent, which I would say was discovered by try and error. And we are now happy. But otherwise, it was a tearful time. Whenever you see the other siblings, or whenever you look at him, all you do is to cry, and you don't know what to do. You don't know what kind of future.
A graphic design graduate, Victor has benefited with mentorship from renowned artist Trevor Wall, who discovered him during one of the art displays in Dubai. His brilliant display of art has seen him showcase his works in various countries, including the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom and the Netherlands. The golden sense of Victor Sitali's silence is evidenced by the creative works that he delivers as his audience waits. Jane Kale, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Football activities resume in Ghana with a special national competition.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every